I hope you're all. Hey guys, I hope everybody's having a good afternoon. My name is Doug Humphrey, and I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Ventures, what used to be OTC at University of Maryland. And we're going to go through one of the very basic things about understanding startups. It's basic, but it's vital, which is to understand what people are doing and what different people do and how what the requirements really are, and how you divvy up the work a little bit. So you see a lot of titles here: CEO, CTO, whatever. What do they do, and when does the business need them? And the when is an important thing, because quite often the um, the startup is very, very stretched for funds. I mean, they're not a lot of, you can't just go willy-nilly hiring a bunch of people. And so it becomes very important to really, really look at who needs to come in when, even though you might want it to be a different sort of way. You might want to hire these guys, but it might be that this person over here actually has the skills that you need first. And it might not be your choice. You might want to bring these people on, but they might have to wait a little while because the needs of the company really come first. And when you have limited resources, particularly. Um, Also, when you build a management team, you don't like look it up in a book and say, well, that's what a management team looks like, so let's hire those. When you build a management team, there are two things that happen. You are constrained, you're guided by the strength and weaknesses of the team members. So if you're already the management team, as in you're the CEO, or maybe you and two other people are doing work and are part of the company, you have to look at what you guys are good at and what you're not good at. And oftentimes that will help guide you in knowing um, where your weaknesses are, because you almost always fill teams in when you can to fill in for your weaknesses. If you're really strong at something, hiring three more people who are also strong at it, well, that might be useful if you have a massive demand for that skill. But most startups don't sort of work that way. Most startups, you start out and you're like a jack of all trades, a king of none. I was a five of all trades, but I could do everything. So, I was useful as the CEO and chief bottle washer and everything else. But pretty quickly, I could identify I'm pretty okay at this and this and this, but these things over here, man, I need to hire somebody else in. Also, the situational needs that confront the team. My startup that's going this way and doing this thing, and your startup going that way and doing that thing, are going to probably have different requirements. They're going to need different kinds of people with different skills. And um, basically, we're going to build different teams to do different companies. So the wearing of different hats, it's an important metaphor, an important way to think about things. Um, you know, when you start out and it's just you, let's say, then you're wearing all the hats, because everything that needs to get done, if it didn't really need to get done, it probably is going by the wayside, not getting done. But if it needs to get done, you're doing it, which means you have your founder hat on, you have your CEO hat on, you have your salesman hat on, you have your marketing hat on when you're tweeting and doing all these things to push your product, your marketing, when you're going to visit somebody or zooming with someone or talking with someone about them actually buying your product or whatever you're selling. You're always recruiting, you're always looking for people with more resource, you're always fundraising, you're always looking for money. So you're wearing all the hats. Very seldom does an early stage startup have one person that's only wearing one hat, because you would need to have an extraordinary need for that hat. And usually that happens with sales. I mean, that's almost always the first one where, there's you're able to hire someone in, or you're just able to say to someone, look, you're a sales guy, you got to sell, get out there and sell. And even then, in startups, usually that person's also doing marketing stuff. Also, if there's a trade show, well, maybe that's marketing, but it's also selling, right? Because you want, There are places where marketing and sales all blur. Flexibility is vital. If you hire somebody with only one skill and they're the best at it around, it may not be a good thing for a startup because you may not need that much of that person. You may need instead to hire somebody who's okay at that, but they're also okay at three other things you need. Jack of all trades, king of none. And that's important. So before you look at titles, okay, I want to be the CEO, I CFO or whatever, you really need to look at the functions because, like I said, you're not going into an experienced large company where the function and the title are kind of like a one-to-one. I'm this guy, I do this job. Instead, you're in startup land much more often like here's a CEO, and this CEO is doing let's see, leadership and strategy, fundraising, accounting, finance, marketing, doing the website, social media, sales, all this stuff. Where they're doing all of this stuff, they may not have a CTO and everything, but then the next thing you see, well, this CEO is doing a different set of things, and it's busted up in different ways to different people. And in reality, it's like, here's your CEO, he's doing these things, CFO is doing those things, CMO is doing those things, da 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 da. But you can see that right there on the screen, you're talking about there are at least 6 employees sitting there. And that assumes that that's all chiefs and no Indians. So, if you look at that, you're like, okay, that's clearly not, that's a 40, 50, 70, 100, 200, 300 person company. Who knows? So you really want to understand what you need, and then you sort of match it to who can do it, and then the titles go from there. It's entirely possible to have multiple titles. We'll talk about that. So titles, functions, org chart, individual professional skills and abilities. What can your team do well? What can your team do okay? And what is your team unable to do that you must do? This drives building the team. Education, what do they know? Networking, who do they know? And time and availability, because remember, as a startup, you're not necessarily there able to write checks for, payroll for market rate. This guy would make $150,000. This woman over here is worth 200 grand a year, and you're not paying her 200 grand a year. You don't have 200 grand for the whole company. So what you're probably saying is, can you do me a couple of hours a day toward the company after you do your day job where you're making 200K? And I'll give you some stock options, and hopefully if our company takes off, we can maybe bring you on board full time, because we all would love that. But right now, I really need maybe an hour or two each evening from you working. And in return for that, we'll do a deal. So titles, org charts, roles, responsibilities. Large corporations tend to ossify, they tend to calcify, they tend to, get a certain structure and then go, oh, well, we can't change that. It would disappoint all these people. Look at all these promises we've made to people. We can't change that. By the way, that's why they die. Startups, why they succeed sometimes, is just straight up flexibility and chutzpah, flexibility and attitude. They can wake up one morning and go, wow, we are going in the wrong direction. Or hopefully we're not going in the wrong direction, but here is a better direction. We need to move to this. And they can change their roles and responsibilities, change their structure. And they realize that if they hired somebody in to do a certain thing, it's actually not a promise that that's never going to change ever in the future, not really. And it's a startup. Everybody should know that flexibility and the ability to steer and move quickly as the situation changes, to pivot, as they say sometimes. That's usually a really, really big change in direction. But that you add new talent, you get new capabilities. Flexibility is key. And one of the reasons why hiring a bunch of middle managers from really large companies is a problem sometimes. Sometimes it's good, but sometimes they like to look at things and say with certainty, here's my job, and my job is this, and my job is not going to change. And that's really tough in a startup. So why have titles at all? I mean, why not just say, look, there's three people here in the room, me and you, and the three of us are running this company. And we don't need to know titles because I know what she does and I know what he does and she knows what I do and he knows what I do and they know what each other do. So why is it a problem? And the answer, of course, is titles have a couple of purposes. One, externality. When you're dealing with an organization or even individuals that are outside of your company, titles are how you explain to them where they should hook in to your company. So, they call up and they say, I need to talk to somebody in sales. And you're like, well, I'm one of the three amigos, you know, but I'm not the right amigo. And you're like, well, how about give me the sales amigo? And external titles are good for connections like that. Internal is also good because as you get to be a little bit larger, it delineates kind of a little bit like this is my job and really not your job. And there's a tendency in startups for people to do the job in the startup that they want to do, even if it's not quite the job that the startup wants them to do. Titles internally allow people to kind of like set some boundaries. And boundary setting is important. If you throw a bunch of people in and everybody is whatever the hell they want to do, well, if they're a programming bunch, maybe they're all writing code. And maybe that's good, or maybe that's not good, but nobody's taking care of customer support or doing finance or something. So internally, titles help you set boundaries. And multiple titles, well, remember we talked about how you're wearing multiple hats. I had a friend, she was CEO of a company, except that when she first met people, and introduced herself as CEO, all sorts of weird things would malfunction. People would get the wrong idea. They would make all sorts of assumptions about their company and her and stuff. And she was kind of like, wow. Or they'd take that as some controversial thing sometimes. So she had another card that said that she was the head of documentation and product documentation, product manuals and stuff, writing, which she was, but she was also CEO. So when you first met her, if there was no context for it, that's the card you would get. And then, you could form a relationship based on, she runs the doc side of the house. Okay. And then later on, you'd be like, oh, yeah, she's also the CEO. And you'd be like, oh, okay. But by then, whatever relationship with the company had been formed and it worked better. So multiple titles, yeah. I mean, oftentimes if you had multiple hats and multiple areas of responsibility, you may actually be carrying a few different business cards. Chief Executive Officer, CEO. We're using the CxO form of titles. You can also say president, vice presidents, whatever, directors, but this is probably the clearest. It's also, as we'll talk in a little bit, there's a downside to it. But CEO, you're head person and head bottle washer and bathroom needs wash. You're responsible for it all. This is the person responsible for everything. Everyone else is responsible for their areas. You're responsible for them, and you're responsible for the company. And that means it's all happening on your watch. And if the aircraft carrier ends up on a sandbar in San Francisco Bay, which really did happen once, it doesn't matter whether you're steering it or not. If you're the captain, you're responsible. Captain the ship. The key things for CEOs, remember, in the beginning, you're going to do everything. So, but you're hopefully going to grow and get out of doing everything. And hopefully you're going to get much more competent people to do these things for you than yourself. It's always, here's a maxim. Always remember this. Always hire better people than yourself. Always. A weak CEO hires weak people so that they will not be challenged. A strong leader just finds the best they can get and is absolutely tickled when they find someone, who is better than they are. And they can be like, I hired him. I hired her. She totally rocks. Boom. That's what you want. When at the very end, you want, you want a team of people who are as good or better than you are at things. That's how it works. Um, so what is a CEO? Leadership, integrity, honesty, loyalty to the company and the employees. None of these things, well, not the last and all, are absolute, you know, but leadership is key. Everyone else is here to do their job, but to look to you for guidance, there go the dogs, and for advice so that they will know what to do. You set the example. If you don't want people doing something, you sure as hell are not out there doing it. You have to set the example. You have to be above reproach. You have to treat people right. If you don't want, you know, whatever practice in your company, your organization, you better not be out there doing it. Integrity and honesty, it should go without saying, but we need to say it. If you don't have integrity and honesty, what are you doing here? You can't be a leader, cannot be a leader. You have to set the example. People will see right through the phony. Doesn't matter how to put it. You don't have to be Superman. You don't have to be Superwoman. You don't have to be invulnerable, and you don't have to not make mistakes. But people need to see that it's an earnest effort, and people need to see that there's no duplicity there, that there's nothing, no hidden agenda there. These are the important things. Honesty. Be straight with people, you know, don't lie. You do these things, they come back to get you. The CEO is not necessarily the original founder. Quite often, they're original founders who the company takes over and becomes not just more important, but becomes larger than the individual. You start a company on ego in a lot of ways. It's totally the truth. But you need to know when to put that ego in a box, put it up on the shelf, and not have it there. Because it's hard to do leadership, integrity, and honesty with your ego getting in the way of everything. So you put that away. But there are times when you pull it down because it's like a nuclear weapon. It's like this huge power. Um, and you report to a board of directors, which is how you keep the ego in check. A board gives you the reality check. The board provides you with information, hopefully some wisdom you don't have, guidance, and are people that you can talk to because it can get a little lonely up at the top. CFO. CFOs run their own sort of world a little. They're like the CEOs of the finance side in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of stuff you need. You need accounting. You need to talk about financial strategies. You need to talk about earning or other raising money. There's a lot of stuff. And when you start bringing in professional investor money, oh, by the way, I'm being visited by an adorable dog, totally adorable. This is Bento. But when you start bringing in investor money, investors will start insisting that you have a real professional CFO to take care of the money, so to speak. Chief Operating Officer. You get to the point where if the CEO is being an external CEO, and by that I mean they're focusing on sales and marketing, which are external functions. They're focusing on fundraising because trust me, in a lot of these companies, man, you get locked into needing the money, you're very external. Then at some point, someone has to be back at home, even though with COVID, you may not be traveling as much, but somebody needs to be back at home, taking care of business and making sure that the trains run on time. So that's kind of an important thing. Making sure everything goes day-to-day internal operations. Sales and marketing can report to a COO, or they could report to the CEO. It depends a lot on the strengths of the CEO. If you have a CEO that can run a sales organization, then most chief operating officers will be fine not to have that underneath them because the sales organization can be a pain in the butt. But if you have a CEO who is not really used to that, then part of your requirements when you're looking for a chief operating officer may very well be to find someone who either has run a sales organization before, or maybe even, has been in that organ, had one report to them, or even run one directly. Chief marketing, again, you got to market. Remember that the reason the company exists is to produce a product, to market that product, to sell that product into markets. And, most products will not sell themselves. Most products are not mousetraps. I'll build a better mousetrap and the world will be the path to your door. You still need to advertise. It's a lot better these days if people are tweeting about your mousetrap to get people to the door. Chief of sales or VP of sales, like I said, sales is its own thing. Sales is weird. It's sort of automatic, as in, I've never had a problem firing a sales guy because, they're either selling or they're not selling. And in a lot of cases, I worry about, am I providing in non-sales? Am I providing enough guidance? Am I, as the CEO, doing my job enough to enable all of my people to do their jobs? Or am I falling down on the job and they're getting the blame? But with sales, you sort of never worry about that much because sales guys either can sell your stuff or they will quit and they'll go someplace else to sell stuff because they're in the business of making money for them. And the only way that they make money for them is on a comp plan. And the only way they get that is by selling product. So if they're in a place where they're not selling product, it's a problem. And they should solve that by going away. If they hang around too long, they get stale and you're kind of like, you should go someplace else. Product roles. So it depends on what you're making in the way of product, right? Is it an app? Is it an online thing? Is it furniture? Is it clothing? Is it, who knows? But you have somebody, a VP, somebody doing development, somebody's developing it and building it, operations, building it, making it work, and customer support. Because no matter what it is you're selling, there will be a customer support component because customers have to be kept happy. And in general, unless you're selling something that lasts an entire lifetime and nobody ever buys two of them, your current customer is always your easiest person to go sell another thing to, right? Finding someone off the street, a new customer costs money in marketing, money and effort. It's a lot of work. And the current guy who's got version 3 of product 2, man, you come out with version 4 of product 6, yeah, you want to be on the phone to this guy, you want to say, hey, I got a new thing, check this out. He is, your existing products are always your easiest sell. Oh, there are also your existing customers on anything are how reference selling are how you sell stuff to other people because you say, hey, go talk to Bob. Bob has been running our thing for 3 years and he'll tell you it's great. That's always easier. So I put together a case study and I'm just going to read a little bit of it. We can send it to you guys. So let's say that Jane realizes she starts a company or she wants to, and she needs more advice, but she thinks about this stuff. She starts developing the requirements. She researches the markets. She is doing all the stuff and she's really doing well. And she's actually got some mock-ups of the product. It doesn't matter what the product is and all of that stuff. She is doing great and she's doing all this work herself. And no, she's not the best at it, but she is tough and she is driven and she's doing it all. She hits this point though where maybe there's a lot of code to be written and she's writing some code, but there's a big difference between somebody who writes some code and then a professional whiz bang genius code writer, But anyway, she's at a party and she starts talking to what do I call him? David, Well, David and she start talking and they're like, hey, David's like, look, I've got time. I can do this. I have a day job, but I can do a few hours a night. I think this is an amazing idea that you got. Let me see what I can do. And she goes, okay. So she thinks, well, how do I compensate David? I don't have any money, I mean, it's not like he's making $150,000 a year at his day job someplace or 80 or whatever it is. I can't afford 8. I can't afford 8, And so David and they say, look, she goes, look, I'll tell you what, I'll keep 2/3 of the company, you keep a third of the company, and we'll talk about in another time, another class, how you actually structure this so people don't walk off. They don't actually get ownership up front. They have to deliver in order to vest, in order to get these options. But she says, look, if this all goes right, you can have up to 30% of the company. And he goes, excellent. I'm on it. Let's go. You know, she decides that she needs an advisory board, and we're going to do another class on boards. But an advisory board is she finds 3 people who are in her industry who she respects and who can tell her and give her clues and help her think about the textile industry or semiconductors or aviation, drones. It doesn't matter. Advisory board are people who are not helping you run your company. They're people who are helping you run your marketing, sales, and product strategy. She brings 3 people on who agree to be on her board for 1% of the company each. So there's 3%. You have a board of directors. Why do you have a board of directors? They are different from the board of advisors. Board of directors is there to help you run the company, and they bring hopefully expertise for running companies. And so you've never run a company before, so having a couple of people, because you're on the board, you as a founder are one of the 3. Board of directors is always either 3 or 5 people. You start with 3 so that when the first investors want to also put people on your board, then they move it up to 5. Has to be an odd number because there are votes. You never want a tied vote on a board, because then who do you appeal to? It's kind of like Supreme Court, right? You never want an even number of justices, because then the entire world will turn into 4-4 ties. And that's terrible. Any justice will basically confide in you. They'd rather lose something 5-4 than vote something at 4-4 tie, because a 5-4 is at least a clean loss. At least it's a judgment. A 4-4 is nothing but a quagmire and a disaster. So we go, and she goes and she pulls 2 more people together whose business advice she really wants to have. Now, why do you give equity to people? People worry about what it's worth. The key is that stock aligns interests. When I have a company and you have some stock in my company, whether you like me or not, you're kind of like, I'm going to throw the ball to Doug. When I hear about an opportunity and that's between these 3 companies, I'm calling the guy who I own a percentage point of, and I'm saying, hey, you need to call Billy over here, because they got a project and they're going to need $100,000 worth of product, or maybe, but you should talk to them. I mean, you throw that fish to whoever it is who's taking care of you, and wherever you have a chance to make some, profit. In the process of things, they're moving along. She and David are getting funding, they're actually out there looking right now for beta customers and first adopter customers for their prototypes. They built 4 prototype things. They a little bit more, let's say a percentage point each, goes to a consultant who's coming in to really help them solve a problem. Maybe a lawyer who's doing a little bit of lawyer stuff on the side, because you don't have any cash. They turn to their friends and family at some point, and they say, look, we need about like 50K cash. And let's say that costs them about like 3%. I think it'll probably cost more than that. Maybe it's 5, 6, but friends and family never get really great deals anyway, because part of it is they're doing it because they know these people. But they raise a little money, they get some product out there, and then they realize we're spending all of our time doing nothing but managing these 4 customers who aren't paying us anything, and they have our prototype product. And Jane and David really need to go do some stuff, and they don't have time. But then they run into Wanda, and they've been looking for Wanda. They haven't even known maybe they're looking for Wanda, but they've been looking for Wanda. And Wanda looks at them and goes, I'll take care of all those customers for you over there. It's no problem. I can learn your product. I can go write documentation for your product. I can maybe kibitz on a new UI for your product a little bit. and I can mind meld with these 4 early customers that you have and take care of them and get them off your back. But that's going to cost you, well, let's see, David cost you 30% of the company. Wanda's going to cost another 15%. Now remember though that, you know, the way dilution works, when Wanda costs you 15%, it's not 15% of 100. It's, well, 15% of, well, the 100 already got reduced by 30, so 70. And the 30 is there, while the 15 is going to come, 15% of 30 is like 4.5, da 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 da. And now everything is going great, but now you realize, okay, we have 4 happy customers for our product, things are going good, but oh no, now we have to raise some real money. So you put a plan together and you go looking for money. And you talk to 60 different places. It all boils down to 2 who make you an offer. And one of those, we'll just call that funder A. It's the better offer. And they offer to give you that 500,000 that you need on a pre-money valuation of $3 million. They say, well, think your old company, probably worth about 3 mil, 500K on 3 gives you 3.5 as a post, 500 on 3.5, about 14% of the company. And so then at that moment, that's when I back calculated all the dilutions. So they're off by a little bit, but trust me, they're close. Jane is now down to about 60% from 100, but she has 3 employees, a fully set up company, and product and beta customers for that product, and a VC or somebody who's put $500,000 in. So she's got $500,000 dry powder. She can hire a few people now and make more product. She's rolling. 60% of that pie is delicious and wonderful, whereas 100% of no pie at all is no pie at all. David's down to 18% from 30, but you know what? Yeah, doesn't really matter. If at the end of the day he has 3% of an initial public offering or 5% of a buyout from some big company, he's gonna be a happy guy. It's all good, All the way down, Wanda's at 9% from 15. It doesn't matter. A slice of the pie is great. Without slices, there's no pie. So this is how it works, because you don't have any money. Now, if Jane did this whole thing and started everything up and happened to have $5 million sitting around in inheritance somewhere, she could probably get all these people and pay them all cash and give them a little bit of stock, because stock is magical, right? Stock options, there's not just a monetary value, but because there's risk and because there's risk reward, there's magic to that stuff. People like that. But it's true, if she had $5 million, she could have just popped $1 million of her own money and then, have the same situation and own 90% of it. But if she doesn't have the money, getting all weirded out about giving away the stock isn't going to do her any good, because guess what? The stock is her currency. You're not giving it away. That is, instead of paying in greenbacks, you're paying in stock options. So let's, I think that's it. Let's go into questions. Anybody have any comments, questions, or, did I miss explaining something? Or let me know what you got. Over to you guys.
So far, Doug, I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A. So while we wait for questions, I'm going to introduce the poll so they can provide some feedback in the meantime, if that's okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you. So please feel free to participate in our poll. As I mentioned before, it is anonymous, and we look forward for your feedback so we can better serve you. Doug, I believe you did an awesome job. You shared a lot of information. I don't see any questions yet.
Well, it's okay. I don't rate it as 2 questions. So, and I wanted to remind everybody, I work for you guys every Thursday. So if anybody has any questions, you can always just sign up for a meeting. And since we don't do meetings, but you can sign up and we'll do a Zoom call one-on-one. And, I can answer any kind of questions then too. It's like, not only is it not a problem, but I love doing it. It's all fun.
Okay, I see we have a question here. How does the stock option work?
Okay, and I'm going to do a class on options. So the founder of the company, owns all the stock pretty much. Now, remember, this may go in an academic sense where you have many people collaborating and stuff. Maybe the initial people who own stock are 3 or 4 or 5 people. There are a bunch of ways to do it. But what you don't want to do is give people stock, because the problem with it is, the guy who got 30% of the stock here. Jane didn't just say to him, "Great, so you're going to do all this work for me. Literally, here is a certificate for 30% of the company." And then what if the guy works for 3 weeks and then stops? Well, he owns a third of the company. Well, that doesn't work that way. What you do is you do stock options and you say, listen, here's a third of the company in return for work over the next 3 years, let's say 2 years, whatever. So let's say 3 years. So it's vesting. That's the technical term. Every month for 36 months, 3 years, every month at the beginning or the end of a month, that guy gets ownership of 1/36 of that 30% of that. And it's not 30%. For now, we'll call it 30 shares of stock. So, what if the guy turns out he does great work for a year, but then he goes on on a vacation, he never comes back, and after trying to contact him for a month, they get a message that just says, look, I'm off in the mountains of wherever, and I'm not coming back, and I've changed my mind. To which they would then say, okay, well, our agreement is terminated. You've already vested in a year and 3 months worth of, your stock options. Hey, great, thank you for working for us. And, we're going to go find someone else with the stock options that you didn't vest in, that you didn't, or whatever. We're going to go find someone else to do the work that we were kind of counting on you doing. So he's not screwed because, he worked for a year and 2 months on it, and he's getting that pro rata share of his 30% over, 36 months. And the company is not screwed because once he stopped working for him, maybe it took him a month to figure it out. But at that point, the company goes, okay, well, we're not paying you to do any further stuff. So that's what a stock option is. And in fact, there are ways to arrange these things so that they're advantageous to the individuals from a tax perspective and all, because what you never want to do is get taxed on something that's not liquid. So that the IRS says, well, congratulations, your stock is worth $1 million. To which you're like, well, yeah, it's worth $1 million on paper, but I can't actually sell it. And they're like, well, we don't care because you still need to pay taxes on it. And we, the IRS, only take cash. I mean, that leaves people in a bad situation. So there are ways to avoid that. Did that help answer your question?
Thank you, Doug. I do not see any more questions presently. I'd like to thank each and everyone for participating in our poll. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to help any of you guys. I hope to talk to everybody soon.
Okay, so at this time, it is 3:41. If there's no more questions, I would like to thank Doug Humphrey, our presenter today, for presenting. The information was very informative and helpful. I hope you do learn from him. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to him directly, schedule an appointment, and he'll be more than happy to share with you. Again, thank you, and do have a great day, each and every one.
Bye, guys.
Bye.